Ace King in a 3-bet pot against the Recreational who jams into you on the turn. A dream spot. Right? Right? We all know the money in poker comes from recreationals, so to be the one who profits the most, you want to know them as well as you possibly can. Who is the recreational isn't so much of a question in a 200-400 high stakes game, because contrary to lower stakes, rags usually already know who the other rags are. But on any limit, the most important question is, how does the recreational play? Because one of the most profitable side effects of knowing a GTO strategy is being able to spot when someone is deviating from it. Here, the trained eye instantly spotted the 3x open and noticed at showdown that the 3-bet preflop has been called with ace-jack off, which is a clear fold in theory and a good data point to have going forward. But it's not only about comparing the recreational's play to GTO. More than anything, we want to get a feeling of how they think. And on this river, seeing them not bet one of the not low hands is an important read. Here, it doesn't really matter whether this play is GTO or not, because we already know we are dealing with a non-professional, so it's not about whether they know the theory or not. It's about whether they think they should bluff a very weak hand on the river or not. And this player doesn't, so let's keep that in mind. Unfortunately, while focusing on the recreational is very plus EV, you can't simply avoid playing against other regulars. Even if it's one of the best in the world, like Taisto. Well, this one you actually could. With these stacks, ace-10 off is often a fold, but it's also fine to 3-bet. If we only use a 75% pot bet on the flop, we'll see that the solver would practically bet range. Turn, we could barrel. Now this donk bet might happen for 3 reasons. 1, it's simply GTO. What might look like an unexpected donk bet is actually part of the solver's strategy. Here, what mainly drives the amount of times that a donk bet would be used is the EV of the cutoff's range. On cards that improve Taisto's range more than Daniel's, Taisto can donk bet some hands. And the turn cards that do that are those low cards like 3s, 4s and 5s, which give Taisto additional nut hands, but improve very few of Daniel's hands. So the nut part of both players' ranges is the deciding factor here. The 2 improves hands that Taisto has but Daniel doesn't, but since it doesn't make nut hands, the donking frequency is on the lower side. 2, exploitative reasons. Let's look at the range that Daniel would have to be barreling if Taisto checked. Here we can divide his range into 2 categories. Value hands, so pairs and better, and bluffs, so non-pair hands. For the value hands, the strategy is rather easy. Basically bet almost all those hands. And I'd say that's also an intuitive approach in reality. For the bluffs, it's much more difficult. A lot of hands are mixing and frequencies are all over the place. In reality, that will be much harder to get right. So let's assume Daniel gets the value betting right, but maybe not the bluffing part. And to explore the impact of that on Taisto's strategy, we can run a node-locked simulation in PureSolver. Here we only adjust the amount of bluffs we expect Daniel to barrel on the turn. And what we see is that if we expect him to bluff less often on a turn, it would incentivize Taisto to donk bet more often. And if we expect Daniel to bluff more often, it incentivizes Taisto to donk bet less often. So Taisto might have decided to donk bet to exploit Daniel or to simply play GTO. We can't know from only seeing this. But what we can tell is that he likely didn't expect Daniil to overbluff on the turn, because otherwise he shouldn't have donk bet. However, there is also a third reason, and that is the fact that it is probably more difficult to play against a donk betting strategy than against a pure checking strategy. Because even though we saw that a turn barreling strategy would require a lot of mixing, a strategy facing a donk bet is even more complicated. So if Taisto thinks Daniil makes more mistakes in the donk betting line than himself, he has another reason to take him there. Against the bet, Daniil's ace-10 off would mostly be a raise. And on the river, he would even have to go for a bluff jam. He simply has so many more king-x hands in his range, which could all go for a value jam. And they are balanced by bluffing all ace-high hands in his range. These block a big part of Taisto's calling range and make his life hell when he has underpairs, which all become 0 EV bluff catchers. However, he checks, which spares Taisto from making a tough decision and might confirm Taisto's decision to go down this part of the game tree. Well, so let's rather continue targeting the recreational. Since you saw your opponent likes to overcall weak hands pre-flop, you can 3-bet lighter for value, which also has the benefit of isolating them. But when you miss the flop completely, and the board has a high chance of hitting your opponent's range, you'd rather not try to bluff them. And as a nice surprise, you see that the recreational again didn't choose to bluff one of the not low hands he could have, even on the board where he could easily represent a strong hand. And the other recs noticed that as well. Because there's no way in hell top pair would ever be considered a fold on this runout where any reg, let alone recreational, could have an endless amount of gut shots or other air hands that check called the flop and are now bluffing on the river. This would usually be the easiest call in the world, except if you have watched closely and have reads. And they get confirmed. So when every time you see this player bet, they have a big hand, then this hand becomes a much harder call to make. But the thing with recreationals is, you just never know exactly what goes on in their head. Something you always have to add to your observations is the X factor. And unfortunately, one player's delight is 5 players, end of the night. Now, to also improve your play against regulars, watch this video next to make playing well against them much easier.